Hey, I think we are live. Hey, Sachin, how are you?
I'm amazing, my man. How are you today?
I'm excellent. Thank you. And I just want to welcome everybody as we're building some traffic and people are joining. Welcome to Rise Up Evolutionary Conversations from the Emerging Edge. And coming to you live from Rythmia down in rainy Costa Rica today. And I'm very, very grateful to have a special guest with us for this conversation, Sachin. Sachin Patel, who is a father and husband and philanthropist and functional medicine practice success coach, speaker, and author. His philosophy is that the doctor of the future is the patient. I love that. And he is actively doing whatever it takes to keep people out of the medical system by empowering them through education, self-care, and remapping their mindset. Sachin founded the Living Proof Institute as part of his own personal transformation and now coaches practitioners from all over the world on how to step into their power and save their communities. To date, he's delivered hundreds of community and corporate workshops. He is an advocate for changing the healthcare paradigm, and he has devoted his life to the betterment of healthcare for both patients and practitioners. What a beautiful introduction, and certainly an expression of who you are on this planet, brother. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's quite the honor, and I'm really excited to share the information and this conversation with you.
Me too. I'm so interested to know a little bit about what brought you to this point. I mean, so much in this biography, in this little bio is, the doctor of the patient is the doctor of the future is the patient. Keeping people out of the healthcare system. And I think we all agree I love what Marianne Williamson said, we have a sick care system, not a healthcare system. Mm-hmm. And you've stated some very powerful things in this statement. And I'd love to know a little bit about your journey and the history and what brought you to this point in your life.
Absolutely. So I started off as a chiropractor, and that was my original journey into healthcare. And as chiropractors, the things that we learn in school are extremely powerful because what we learn in school teaches us and impregnates into us this idea that the body is self-healing, it's self-regenerating, it has intelligence. In the chiropractic field, we call this the innate intelligence. And so we know that there is something that science can't quite describe, and there's something that we inherently know is true, which is that there's this divine force that basically permeates through us and through everything in this entire universe. So when I graduated as a chiropractor, I focused on athletics. So my original focus was treating people with athletic injuries, marathon runners, triathletes, professional football, baseball players. And, we were doing a great job, and that landed me on the news. They did a news segment on our practice. And as a result of that, we had an influx of people coming into our practice. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, all of these people were sick beyond my training. So what does that mean? They weren't sick beyond being fixed. They weren't sick beyond, finding their birthright of being healthy, but they were sick beyond my training. But what I also learned is they were sick beyond other people's training as well, because these people had seen every other practitioner. They'd seen the specialist. They'd seen, their medical doctor. They'd seen people who were experts in the condition that they were described to have. And what I realized at the time was I didn't have the tools to help them, but there was a reason, there was a divine intervention that took place that brought this person into my office. And when patient after patient after patient kept coming in like this, it's kind of a defeating feeling. As a parent myself, if your child gets hurt or injured and you can't really do anything about their pain, it's kind of a gutting feeling. And that's what it felt like for me. There's been people I couldn't help. There's been people that I didn't know what to do with, but I always had a place or person to refer them to. But when these people came in and they were at their wits' end, I didn't know where to refer them to. So I took it upon myself to find some answers and figure out, hey, what can I do, or what can somebody else do for these individuals? And that's when I found out about functional medicine. And for those of you that don't know, functional medicine is essentially root cause medicine. It's what medicine should have been all along, and maybe what medicine was in the very beginning, but it's migrated into a different direction since then. What we do is we help our clients find the root cause of their chronic health issues. Now, as a chiropractor, we were open to the ideas of psychosomatic pain, which means that when we're hurting at an emotional level, that can express itself as physical pain. Not just a micro trauma injury or an acute injury, but our pain will express itself, even from an emotional level, at a somatic level, or at a body level. So I started learning about the different root causes of chronic diseases. So it could be emotional, it could be environmental, it could be biochemical, it could be a nutrient deficiency, it could be a toxicity of a poison or something that our body has too much of. And as we started identifying some of these root causes with our clients, we started getting rid of chronic health challenges that they had for many, many, many years. Now, initially, my journey started really focusing on the biochemistry and the things that we could measure, the things that we could test. And, we would come up against some cases where we got these people better on paper, but there was still some room for improvement. And that's when we realized that not everything can be measured, right? So, there's limitations of what we can measure because the instruments that we have can't measure certain things. And, we were heavily relying on being able to quantify somebody's, pain or their discomfort or their dysfunction on a piece of paper. And that's a
Right.
limitation of all healthcare. Even functional medicine is limited because we're still focusing on what we can measure. And that's when my career kind of evolved and I started realizing, hey, there's more to this than just making numbers normalize on a piece of paper. I could address somebody's nutrient deficiencies, I could get rid of their toxicities, but there was still something that was missing. And that's when we realized the importance of addressing their spiritual health, their emotional health, their mental health, the things that are so difficult to measure, but are easy when we have a conversation with somebody, that are easy to solve when we're willing to listen to somebody, that are easier to solve when we're willing to ask the right questions and then have a conversation with somebody to dig a little bit deeper. And what we found was that the majority of people with chronic health challenges are oftentimes dealing with some sort of unresolved, unprocessed trauma. And in many times, that trauma is even unbeknownst to them. So once we started working on that layer of people's health, we started getting even more amazing results. So that's where
So
we've evolved. That's kind of the shortcut version, but that's how we've evolved to where we are now.
how interesting if you can't measure it, right? You can't measure it with the instruments of science, right? But there's clearly a result. The result is just feeling good. How would you then measure success?
Well, feeling good is one. Another way to measure success for now that we have these tracking tools is something called HRV. So heart rate variability is a measure of the resilience and tone of your nervous system. So, just to give people a little bit of backstory, we have something called the autonomic nervous system, which basically is the operating system of all of the processes in our body right now. So right now it's controlling, my body temperature, it's controlling my heart rate, my breathing rate. The cells inside of me are dying in this moment and being reborn and rebirth. That entire process is being regulated by what we call the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two, it's just like a light switch. It can be on or off. And in this case, when it's on, we call that sympathetic dominance. And when we're sympathetic dominant, we're in a fight or flight state. And what essentially happens when we're in fight or flight is we're sending blood away from the trunk organs, the liver, the kidneys, the digestive organs, reproductive organs. Those organs get less blood when we're under stress. And that blood, instead of being in the trunk, healing, regenerating, providing nutrients, goes to the arms and legs. Interesting fun fact, when we're in fight or flight, only about 5% of our blood goes to our liver and kidneys. When we're in rest or in a meditative state, in an intentional state, then about 50% of our blood goes to our liver and kidneys. So what we discovered is the tone of somebody's nervous system is far more predictive in their healing journey because it determines where we're going to be sending blood to. So the opposite of that is what we call the parasympathetic division. And when we're in a parasympathetic tone, then that's when we're healing, we're repairing, we're regenerating, we're digesting, we're resting, we're recovering. So all the goals that people have when it comes to their health live on the parasympathetic side of the equation, but most people live their life in a sympathetic equation. So the balance between these two can be measured by something called heart rate variability. And we all know, many of you watching this probably know that the heart emanates an electromagnetic field. And that field has important properties. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things that we can measure is the variability between each heartbeat. The variability between each heartbeat tells us what state the nervous system is in. Is it in a stressed out state or is it in a relaxed state? And if we can get that nervous system to be more relaxed, more parasympathetic, and if we can measure that using easy devices like HeartMath or Aura Ring, or you can even use a Whoop band to measure HRV, then an increase in HRV tells us that we've increased the resilience of this individual. Now, just to give somebody an idea of what resilience is, think of it like a cup. Okay, so I've got this, it's my favorite mug here. I've got this mug here, and this mug holds 16 ounces. So my level of resilience in this case, metaphorically, would be 16 ounces. Now, imagine that cup is already filled to 12 ounces, and I've got another 8 ounces of stress that is going to get piled on by my day or by my circumstances or by all the stuff that's going on in the world right now. Well, my cup's going to start overflowing. So sometimes I can't change the size of my cup, but what I can do is I can empty that cup. And by emptying that cup, we create more resilience. So in a 16-ounce cup, if I can get that as empty as possible, then I can add 16 ounces of stress without the cup overflowing. Now, the goal is always to keep as much, reduce the stress as much as possible. We can talk about that too. But, if we can measure somebody's HRV and we see the HRV increasing over a period of time, then we know that their health is moving in the right direction. So there are ways to measure it, but it's slightly indirect, but it's super accurate and very well researched.
This brings up, as you were talking about other aspects of health and measurement, one of the things that interested me so much in a conversation that you and I had a couple weeks ago was about fractals and your work with fractals. And we can tie that into the beginning of our conversation, because I want to get to a point where we can apply fractals to health, apply fractals to social situations, to our own spiritual growth and development, to plant medicine. But this was a really interesting aspect of your work. So in essence, how are you using fractals? Can you tell us about fractals, what they are, and how you currently use them or use this knowledge?
Sure, absolutely. So fractals are a form of mathematics. The mathematics that we learned in school is what we call Euclidean mathematics. So Euclidean mathematics is great for, designing shapes and creating computers and all that kind of stuff. But it's not good at describing what happens in nature. And so fractal mathematics are, very simple yet complex equations. So what's really interesting about fractals is using very simple equations, we can actually create very complex shapes. And isn't that kind of the theme that the divine has given us, is that the greatest sign of sophistication is actually simplicity. So imagine a short equation that just has, a multiplication sign and maybe a division sign, not fancy mathematics, but that equation can describe how a tree grows. That equation can describe how the mathematics of our body works. That can describe how the cosmos works, because we've learned this in many religious texts: as above, so below. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. And fractals teach us that. These are self-similar repeating patterns at every single scale in the universe. So if you look around in nature, you will see self-replicating, repeating patterns. And we'll usually see this as like a branching architecture. So I'm going to show you an image, if I may, because I think it'll help me describe my point, that this pattern occurs at every single scale. And if we can see this, it's impossible to unsee it. And once you see it, you'll see it in everything. You'll see it everywhere. And you'll tap into a code that allows you to heal at a remarkable rate. So if you can allow me to share my screen, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you just have to give me permission to do that.
I think Jen is on there. Are you able to give permission to share the screen, Jen? So maybe she's not. Oh, yes.
Yep.
There she goes. She just gave us a yes. All right.
Okay. So it looks like my Zoom will cut off because I just updated my Apple software. So I might not be able to share my screen just yet because
Okay.
it would cancel the Zoom call. But imagine this. If you were to look at, and you can research this, you can type this into Google if you want to. If you were to type in mouse brain and dark matter, you would come up with an image where on the left-hand side, you see a mouse brain zoomed in under a magnifying glass or under a microscope. And then what you would see on the other side of it would be the biggest picture, the most accurate picture we have of the dark matter in the universe. And what you would see is that these images look identical. So from the largest scale in the cosmos all the way down to some of the smallest scales in the cosmos, there's this pattern that keeps repeating itself. This is why when you look at a tree, okay, so if you go outside and look at a tree in the winter, what you see is the architecture of our lungs.
Absolutely.
If you were to take that tree and lay it flat, you would see how river deltas are formed.
Yes.
If you were to look at that tree, you would see how the roots are formed as well. So these self-similar patterns repeat themselves on every single scale. So this is why I tell people, if you want to know what your body looks on the inside, go outside, because the patterns in your body repeat themselves at that scale. Our brain, for example, is a branching architecture. That's why our brain can store basically infinite amounts of data, because this branching architecture provides virtually infinite surface area. One interesting fun fact about nature is that, and it wasn't until somebody told me this that I realized this. I'd known it all along, but nobody pointed it out to me. When we learn mathematics in school, we're creating perfect squares, we're creating perfect triangles, we're creating perfect shapes, right? With perfect surface areas and absolutely perfect lengths and all that stuff. But here's the irony in this: there are no straight lines in nature. There is roughness in nature, and this was first described by Dr. Mandelbrot, who was the first person to actually, research this information and plug it into computers and create what is now famously known as a Mandelbrot set. So nature has roughness to it. There's nothing smooth in nature. And this is a great metaphor for life. Nothing in our life goes smoothly, right? If nature doesn't create anything smooth and we're one with nature, we are part of nature, we are part of the same fractal equation, then there's nothing smooth that's going to happen in our life. And there's going to be roughness, but we have to learn to appreciate that roughness, because that roughness is what creates beauty. Imagine trees were perfectly round. They wouldn't have beauty to them. Right? Imagine leaves were all perfectly square. There would be no beauty to them. It's the roughness that gives beauty. And so when we start seeing these patterns repeating themselves on every scale, we start realizing, hey, if things smaller than me have this pattern and everything bigger than me has this pattern, what excludes me from having this pattern internally? And the answer is nothing. So we have this self-replicating, self-repeating pattern in our body. In fact, one of my colleagues and dear friend Sav Virani wrote a whole book on this, relating how healthcare has missed this entire paradigm of mathematics and excluded it from actually finding solutions. So we are built using a fractal architecture, but most of our medical system studies the human body using Euclidean, or what we call Newtonian, mathematics. And this is why we have such a hard time creating an actual solution, and why nature has such an easy time creating a solution for us. So if we consume plants, if we consume fungi, if we consume, things that are created by Mother Nature, well, guess what? They're built using fractal architecture, and only a fractal can heal another fractal.
So this brings me, this is perfect segue into the next question, right? So we see fractals in nature, whether it's the alluvial fan of a river system, or in a tree, or in our lungs, all repeated, similar, simple patterns. So then, how can we use these patterns, this observation, how can we use it in real life? You're talking specifically about medicine. So I'd love to hear that. How can we apply this knowledge to the holistic healing in medicine? But I'd also love to, move into that. We'll bring that into our social, spiritual, and political understandings as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
great questions. So one of the things that's interesting about fractals is a fractal, mathematical set is is a way that we can create the most amount of surface area in the smallest amount of volume.
Mm.
So what's really interesting about that is, and when we explain this to clients, they're just like so blown away. Like inside your digestive tract, you have over 3,000 square feet of surface area. And you're like wondering, how do you wrap all of that up? Imagine trying to take a 3,000 square foot carpet and wrap it up into like a small roll. It would be huge, right? It would not be that small, but it's because we have this fractal architecture, we can have massive amounts of surface area. Now, what's interesting about when you have increased surface area, you also have increased data storage capacity, right? So imagine a piece of paper that's 1 inch by 1 inch. Now imagine a piece of paper that's infinitely large. You can store so much more data on that information. So this is how our brain can store so much information, not just at a conscious level, but at an unconscious level. This is how our body can and our brain can process information. And even though something happened many, many years ago, it's still stored in our hard drive, right? If so to speak. So one big thing that we help people do is realize the difference between, the hardware era of medicine, which is appropriate, and the software era of medicine. So our body has two things, just like a computer. There's hardware and there's software.
Right.
The hardware on a computer is the keyboard, it's the monitor, it's the chips, it's all that stuff. The software is the programming that operates the hardware. And so what's really fascinating to me is that when we use nature as a tool, we're getting a software upgrade. When we use plants, we're getting a software upgrade. When we're using tools from nature, they're compatible, highly compatible with our body. And that's why there's minimal side effects when we use herbs or nutrients that come from nature. The hardware era of medicine is kind of where we're stuck right now. And that's where we're trying to replace things, right? So we're trying to find out what's broken. We're trying to find out what needs to be replaced. We're trying to find out what needs to be cut out, what needs to be removed and replaced with something new, like a liver transplant or a kidney transplant or heart transplant or whatever the case may be.
Or even a pill. Let me give you this pill to bring down your cholesterol. It's to replace some function.
Right. And so typically when we use medications, we're micromanaging the body, right? And we're micromanaging just one of the millions of things that the body does. And that's where we can lead to disastrous fates, because there's a domino effect of manipulating and micromanaging the body. And that's why one drug, although it can do one thing really well, it can create a whole host of other side effects because there's other dominoes that fall. So what we need to start looking at the body is from the perspective of software, right? So if we look at it from a hardware perspective, what's really cool about the body is that virtually every 6 months, 90% of the cells in your body have replaced themselves. So the hardware is constantly replacing itself. So it kind of begs the question, why do people stay sick? Why do people stay unwell? Well, does buying you a new car make you a better driver? Probably not, right? So giving you
might be more careful for a week, but
right. But giving you new cells, which is happening in this moment, every moment, doesn't necessarily make you healthier unless you change the signals that you're sending to the cells. Okay. So if I have a virus, so to speak, or if I have a bad software issue, right, on my computer, getting a new monitor is not going to fix that problem. Getting a new keyboard is not going to fix that problem. And that's what so many people try to do with their health. They don't like what shows up on the screen, so they try to buy a new screen, right? And the screen isn't the problem, because if I buy a brand new one and I plug it in, you're going to have the same issue. And so we need to start shifting and realizing that in human biology, the software not only governs the hardware, but it builds and creates the hardware. And so if we can see it from that perspective, we can start, taking full control of our health.
Okay, so help me understand a little bit more directly, or maybe I missed something, but I want to make sure I get this, and I'm sure everybody is interested as well because it's so fascinating. So this recognition of these small and replicating patterns, right? And we can understand something about our health in the essence that this is software upgrade, right? So that when we ingest, that was one thing that you said, when we ingest healthy whole foods, they are replicating those fractal patterns of health and wholeness within our body. what are the other practical applications of this understanding to healing?
Yeah, so let me just provide some additional clarity for that. So think of food as math. Think of it like an equation. And so if we use nature and we think of it like software. So when I eat, I don't think of it as food. I think of it as software. I think of it as information coded into that food for my body. So there's going to be an interaction that occurs between that food and my body,
I
and
love
it's going to
that.
signal my body to then, to take on some sort of action. Right now, so that's one thing to help kind of clarify that. Another thing for us to realize is that fractals are everywhere in everything. So they're not just in the food that we eat, but they're in the things that we see. So when we go out in nature, remember our brain is a fractal structure. When we go out in nature and we stare at trees and we stare at the beautiful leaves and we stare at the branches and we stare at the river, I mean, that's all built on mathematical, fractal mathematics. And so that information, that light information that's coming into us is also healing our brain. The sounds of nature are healing our brain. So all the sensory input that comes in that's coded with fractal information is going to help heal us on every single dimension possible.
So I have a bad back, let's say, and I decide to come to your office and say, hey, I've gone to the chiropractor, I've taken anti-inflammatories, I've done stretching and yoga, and this still isn't healed. And you're going to tell me to go look at trees and listen to birds, or what? How does that practically apply?
Well, interesting enough, most low back pain, I'll just use this as an example, is actually caused by stress. So the majority of women who have upper back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, usually that's caused by stress. So that's psychosomatic. And for men, assuming we've ruled out, something structural, a herniated disc, or anything like that, then a lot of times it ends up being a chronic stress. And so we would definitely want to work on addressing that. Now, also keep in mind that our organ systems also hold emotion, right? So the kidneys and the liver, they hold emotional energy as well. So sometimes it's a matter of getting some of that released too. Certainly we don't, if you came to me, I wouldn't send you outside and say, hey, go look at trees.
Although I'd love it. That'd be great therapy.
Certainly it would be helpful for you, right?
Reduce my stress.
because we know that going in nature actually gets us more parasympathetic. It's almost hard to be in the woods and be mad, right? And if you ever experience this, if you're ever about to enter the woods, the moment you enter the woods, there's a shift in your physiology. Even if it's for a moment that you perceive it, I perceive a huge shift in my physiology. So I go from when I go biking, as soon as I go under the trees and in their shade and in their presence, and I can feel them. They can feel me. We certainly know that through the mycelium, but I can feel them. I can feel their beautiful energy. My body is inhaling the sounds. It's inhaling the essential oils. My eyes are being flooded with fractal information, and it starts immediately shifting us into a more parasympathetic state. So certainly if your low back pain is stress related, it could definitely be of great help and service to you.
I gratefully do not have any lower back pain. I was just throwing something out there, but to see really how that would, how we could apply this understanding of fractals to practical application to physical health and wholeness. So you're looking at the whole body and saying, well, we know typically this comes from stress, so I'm going to help you to address some of the issues as well as with the kidney and liver. And it sounds like holistic meditation and nature therapy, et cetera. But really, like, how do we take this understanding and move it to our spiritual growth and development? How do we take this understanding and move it into can we use this understanding of fractals to assess and get guidance in our current political situation, whether it's with the protests or with COVID? Like, help me understand how this can be practically applied, because in essence, it's super fascinating. It makes complete sense to me. I see it in ceremony. I think I shared that with you as well, that the pinta that we see, those beautiful geometric shapes that come in ceremony behind you, the tree of life, that is that other self-replicating, repeatable pattern.
Mm-hmm.
I clearly see this as information, and I see our endocrine system as the physical antenna hardwired in the body to receive this information without me having to process it on an intellectual level, right? That my pituitary gland and pineal gland are there transforming that vibrational frequency into neurotransmitters and toxic or tonic chemicals in the body, depending on how I'm interpreting them. Am I on the right track there?
I love that. I think you did a great job explaining that.
Great. Okay, cool. Yay. So then how do we take that more than just this understanding that I'm receiving information when I'm in meditation or in ceremony and that my body's actually designed to process it? How can we now apply that to our political situation, to the COVID situation, to give us some insight on your understanding through your work with Fractals?
Well, I would love to see them, spraying from airplanes plant medicines, because I think if people could see the beauty that's available to us within minutes, that's accessible to us, it would change the world, right? So, if really funny story, on topic but off topic. Like, I'm a big proponent of 5G, but when I'm referring to 5G, I'm referring to 5 grams of psilocybin, right? So
Right.
I'm not referring to like the telephone companies. I certainly think that there's, that's up for debate, but I definitely think that there's so much that the world could benefit from by, sharing, plant medicines with people. So,
do you remember, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but do you remember that there was a meme going on? I think it was an actual picture of a guy holding a sign up in New York, and it was written on cardboard and said, "Cops need to do ayahuasca."
Yeah. Well, I think everyone does, right? Like, it's not like, everyone does, because I feel like it would give each and every single individual an access to unconditional love, which many people haven't had. And I think that's what people are searching for. They don't know how to find it, right? Like, for some people,
they don't know that it's right there. We
Right.
don't know. So often we don't know that we're surrounded by love.
Mm-hmm.
And that the universe, in fact, is created at that frequency of love, the highest frequency. And that's really the piece of opening up to see that which, it's called limited perception. Love is everywhere. It's only suppressed by limited perception.
Right. It's what we're looking for, right?
Yeah, right. So I kind of jumped in there, but tell me what people are looking for. The plant medicine, you were saying plant medicine is a harbinger of unconditional love. It's a way to tap into the fact that we are actually love itself. We are made of love. And so, and I know you were heading from there into the application of this knowledge of fractals in our current political environment.
Yeah, well, I think it always starts with us, right? And Gandhi said this best. Be the change we wish to see in the world. And I believe that if we can do our best to model for others what we want the world to look like, and do the work on our own, that's gonna be the best place for us to start, right? I think it's you want to actually create wonder in people. When you walk into a room, people should wonder, why does he have such a big smile on his face? Why is he or she so generous? Like, what are they so happy about? Like, I want to know what they're drinking. I want to know what they're eating. I want to know what they're smoking, if that's the case. I want to know, where did this person, given everything that's going on in the world right now, how do they maintain their equanimity? And how do they maintain their composure? So we can be role models for other people. And I think that's the best thing that we can ask of ourselves right now, especially since a lot of us are being called to do that, right? We're being called to be beacons of light for other people and be examples for other people right now.
I couldn't agree more. You mentioned the Hermetic truth as above, so below. And the second part of that is as within, so without. Right, like that,
right.
And it is that aspect of our connectedness to that energetic frequency, the patterns that are everywhere present that are within us, as we harmonize those patterns within us, we then are connected to that creative medium that we live and move and have our beingness in, that responds to us, right? That there's an energetic response. So yes, the work is inside. It's an inside job.
Well said.
I'm sorry?
I said, well said.
Thank you. I'd love to kind of, so that's on a sort of spiritual level, but also how we can bring this understanding into how that outpictures in our interactions with others. One of the things that I've noticed about myself and my own unfolding during this time, especially the last few weeks after George Floyd and all of the subsequent protests, is I saw how recalcitrant I was in my own political beliefs. Almost like, well, if you can't see how absolutely wrong you are, I don't even know where to begin, right? Like, and that's exactly the place we don't need to be right now. And I could see within myself my ability, my willingness to reach across, to hear and to connect and to be curious about somebody else's ideas, right? But that comes from a place of security within myself, right? So it begins on that level. What else, I want to jump to, I love the idea of utilizing this notion that so if fractals are small and repeated equations, patterns, everywhere in nature, from the largest expression to the smallest, from the macro to the micro, and back again, then our understanding of fractals helps us understand that as we harmonize those aspects within ourselves, we will be harmonized with those patterns in nature, whether it's political, physical, spiritual, mental, etc.
You got it. You hit the nail right on the head, my man. It's the way I look at it, and I don't have any evidence to support this, but I feel like if I can view it from this perspective, it's very helpful for me. I look at my HRV, my heart coherence field, I look at that as an equation.
Mm-hmm.
So if that equation were to amplify itself, because it does, right, to a larger scale, what would the impact of that be? So it holds me accountable to what I'm feeling, how I'm feeling, especially when I amplify it times 1,000, times 1,000,000, times
I
1 billion.
that.
So, if I'm emanating love, right, and I'm multiplying that, I can feel good about that. But if I'm angry and I can catch myself, because, there's no yin without the yang, right? And that's another thing we have to realize. So as much, violence and as much protest and as much outbursts and things like that we're seeing, there's that much love on the other side, right? So it's what we choose to focus on, because they both have to coexist. And it's kind of like we're stuck in the middle of this, right? And we're seeing it and we're able to witness it and have equanimity, so we can see, what's actually happening and process it without getting emotionally charged. Sometimes it's hard not to, but we do our best not to get emotionally charged with it. And one thing that came up for me as we're having this conversation is that, love is permanent, hate is not. So all this stuff that's happening, it's people are expressing themselves. Their equation is expressing itself because it was bottled up inside of them. Now it's expressing itself on a larger scale, but that's not permanent. That will eventually turn into love once there's understanding that takes place.
Another Hermetic principle is the law of duality, mm-hmm. right? That if there's a singular source, but then we have this dimension of duality, that all duality is just a matter of spectrum. And that, the example used, I think, is of hot and cold, right? Like, where does hot become cold and cold become hot, right? There's the, because in the winter, I can put my thermostat at 72 and it's going to be quite warm in my house. And in the summer, I put it at 72, it's going to be quite cold in my house, right? So the duality, is just an expression of of the same thing, of
Right.
one thing. So that it's always phased in. So in that sense of spectrum, I'd love to look at another question that has to do more physically, and it'll be our last question today. And then I'd love to give you a chance to just wrap up anything that you'd like to add. But I really, and I didn't even ask you about this before, as you were talking, something came up for me about stem cells. And you were talking about the hardware and the software, right? And I know a little bit about cellular exhaustion, that, you know, as we age, the amount of time it takes for our cells to replicate increases. It's the longer replication, they're less robust, they're less vital. And I think something on the lines of that as we begin to age, cellular exhaustion outpictures as sleep patterns, circadian rhythms, weight loss or weight gain rather, not being able to recover as fast as we normally do, eyesight, hearing, libido, all of those, you know, skin, everything that happens as we age is an effect of cellular exhaustion, shortening of our telomeres. Stem cells then become I'd love to know your understanding from a holistic perspective, hardware versus software, that these cells are hardware, but they're also delivering vesicle bits of information, right? Through the paracrine effect. They're expressing exosomes and cytokines and growth factors and proteins and all sorts of little packets of information, intercellular communication. So there's a software update as well. Can you make sense of anything that I said? Can you make sense of everything I said, please? And bring in fractals.
Well, I'll do my best. Let's start with stem cells. So, you know, stem cells are undifferentiated cells that, when provided with the right information, can differentiate into specific tissues, right? Or, you know, it can differentiate into muscles, it can differentiate into brain, neurons, it can differentiate into joint and connective tissue. So, one of the most effective ways to actually increase stem cell production is fasting. So when we fast, we go through this, you know, autophagy, where our weak and senescent cells are then eliminated and, you know, they die off. And then on day 4 and 5 of our fast is when our body starts generating millions upon millions of stem cells to allow for regeneration to take place. So there's a few ways to do that. One is through fasting.
I want to ask you a question really quickly about that, because there's also lots of evidence. While I've seen a lot of studies, especially there was one out of UCLA recently over the last couple of years, that talked about 5-day water fast, day 4 and 5, stem cell production increases. And then on the same side, there's lots of information that shows that extended water fasts increase free radical production in the body and can be actually quite damaging. And that intermittent fasting is a better, less harmful way of utilizing fasting, but it doesn't have the effect of stem cell production. Can you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So one of our mentors, Walter Longo, wrote a book called The Longevity Diet, and he talks quite a bit about this. And certainly, I would encourage somebody who's interested in this to look at that book. And he also developed something called the fasting mimicking diet. And so certainly a water fast for 5 days is pretty advanced, right? That's a tall order for the average Canadian or American, or
Totally.
you know, it's not an easy thing to do, especially because of the mental and emotional conditioning that we have around food, right? Food is a comfort. Like when we're in pain, our parents would give us food. When we're celebrating something, we would use food as a source of celebration. So food is a big part of our culture and a big part of our emotion as well. So
yes.
What they found was that getting people to do a 4 or 5 day water fast was nearly impossible, but getting them to do a calorie restricted, what we call a fasting mimicking diet, where you would be able to eat a smaller amount of food each day for 5 days and portion controlled, but then you'd on day 4 and 5 get the effect of releasing these stem cells. So we have our clients do this sometimes on a quarterly basis. So we're not doing it on a monthly basis. That might be a little bit too frequent for some people. But if we can get people to do this on a quarterly basis, biannually, or even annually, that's a good way to start. Like in the new year, people are like, oh, I'm going to change my diet. I'm like, why don't you just stop eating for 5 days and see what happens? Because that's probably the fastest way to get rid of your pain, your inflammation, your
Right.
weak and dying cells, and start fresh, right? How about we instead in within a from Monday to Friday, how about on Friday you have billions of stem cells, and now you've got your body regenerating itself unlike it's ever done before, and people feel amazing doing that.
This is
So
a calorie restricted diet, like what, less than 700 calories a day, or?
yeah, it varies from day to day, but it's sub 1,000 calories per day, and
Okay.
it goes all the way down to I think around 400 calories on days 3 and 4. So it gets down pretty
You
low,
get
and
an
then
almond and two almonds and a slice of apple. There you go.
well, they actually include all the food. So there's a kit that you can buy, but if you buy the book, there's actually suggested recipes and things like that. And you'll be surprised. Like when you eat a plant-based diet, um, there's not much calories in that, right? Compared
Yeah.
to eating and the diet itself is all plant-based. So you're going to get a lot of fiber, you're going to get a lot of phytonutrients, but you're not going to get a lot of calorie density. So, that's what we found to be really, really effective at getting stem cell production out of these people. And, like I said in my bio, we believe that the doctor of the future is a patient, and that nothing can heal your body better than it can heal itself. So we just have to tap into that self-healing, property, which fasting allows us to do. And certainly I think a good mix in between is the intermittent fasting. So we usually have what we call time restricted feeding as a recommendation for our clients. It's a really easy place for people to start. Just eat within a certain window instead of
Right.
eating all day throughout the day. Maybe you want to have 16 hours between your last meal and your first meal the next day, and you want to try to eat about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours before bedtime. So if we can narrow our feeding window, then that makes a huge difference in organ reserve and recovery and so on and so forth.
I love the way you said our feeding window. It is totally, sometimes I do feel like a cow at the trough. Really. So I guess to just finalize the stem cell conversation, how do you feel, or regarding, so there's, we can produce our own stem cells, although a 5-day water fast is a tall order for most people. What about mesenchymal stem cells, umbilical cord stem cells, and their use in terms of either direct injection into joints or intravenous injection for overall health, for an overall software update?
Yeah, so there's certainly people that are way more specialized in that topic than I am, and I definitely defer some of those more detailed questions to them. But I do know I have colleagues that do stem cell therapy, and one of the first things that they do, the really good ones, is they won't just take out your stem cells and inject them back into you. What they want to know is that you're doing the work. So they
Right.
want to know, are you eating healthy? Are you moving healthy? Is your circadian rhythm where it needs to be? Because if we're going to do this work, let's do it right. So a lot of the clients that I work with that are into stem cells, that are functional medicine practitioners, they focus on creating healthy stem cells first, and then extracting them and then injecting them. And I haven't used them personally myself, but I've seen some amazing turnaround in people's health. And joint health improves for people. Their skin health improves. I mean, there's so many benefits that people have received from stem cell therapy.
Well, before we went live, we talked for a minute and I said, oh, we're going to keep it about 30 minutes. And I'm looking now at the time where we're at 50 minutes because I really enjoyed speaking with you so much. And you brought forth so much wonderful knowledge and wisdom. And it's just such a great pleasure to have you here for the interview. And I just want to, before closing out, is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything else that any point that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I would definitely ask people to YouTube Mendelbrot Zoom set. So if they could do that, I think they'll be fascinated for hours upon hours just staring at the Mendelbrot set. And if you ever want to see your children be dazzled and just amazed, put on that video, and you'll see them. They'll just get sucked in, and it'll remind you of we are fractals. And when we see other fractals, we're just blown away by their beauty and their dimensionality and their in my opinion, their capability. So I would say, check that out. That's just kind of like a little freebie for all of you guys. Just go to YouTube and type in Mendelbrot set Zoom, and be prepared to be bedazzled. And I hope that today I didn't answer all your questions, but I got you to ask more questions, because this is a deep rabbit hole. And in the 50 minutes we've had, it's hard to do the whole topic justice. And with so much going on in the world, I see that there's a ton of application for fractals, in our financial systems, in our health systems, in our political systems. I mean, there's so many applications of this, because when we see ourselves in others and in everything, it kind of changes our perception of things.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Thank you, brother. It was great, great, great. Thanks for your time today. Wishing you just abundance of peace and health of body and all needs met. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you. I love you. Thank you, my man.
Love you
Appreciate it,
too,
John.
brother. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye-bye.